Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We're really excited to host another AIC lecture. This is the last of the semester, and so it's just a great way to end with the amazing and incredible Dr. Wendy Sajda Mohammed. Tonight, she is with us, and she'll be speaking about Mind of an Entrepreneur. Wendy is an international entrepreneur. She is currently president and the director of business affairs for the Minimally Invasive Vascular Centers, where along with her business partner, she has developed a progressive new business model for outpatient surgery centers in micro-hospitals. The brand has recently expanded to major markets throughout the US and Africa. Their state-of-the-art facilities have revolutionized the delivery of advanced healthcare services to marginalized communities around the world. Wendy is the creator and developer of the Mind of an Entrepreneur brand that currently produces and facilitates books, radio shows, and film projects on business development and mental strategies for navigating the world of business. The Mind of an Entrepreneur brand also focuses on helping members of marginalized communities open the pathways to wealth and abundance through owning and operating businesses and introducing much-needed goods and services into their communities. Wendy has also expanded her business consulting practice to include hospital investments, turnaround consulting, and healthcare acquisitions. One of her new exciting ventures includes the reclamation and renovation of a turn-of-the-century mansion that was once the former home of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The building will be the new home of the Mind of an Entrepreneur that will serve as a cultural exhibit as well as a training and development center for entrepreneurs from marginalized communities around the world. As a business consultant, executive project manager, and business thought leader, she has trained thousands of entrepreneurs and emerging leaders and managed over $500 million in projects. She has served as crisis manager for many corporations, executives, and celebrities. Without further ado, please welcome Wendy Mohammed.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'd like to talk to you today to encourage you to become more conscious as professionals and entrepreneurs and profit with intention and with purpose. That is what the Mind of an Entrepreneur movement is all about. And my prayer is that I can help to raise your awareness about your mindset as students, as professionals, and as business people, about how to do business with more intention so that how we sustain ourselves is more closely aligned with our beliefs. For us as African Americans and Muslims, the push towards business and land ownership is at an all-time high. And we must remember, all of us must remember, that we cannot simply mimic what we are taught in the corporate world, or else we all risk establishing the same predatory system within our communities that we are all seeking to escape from. So thank you, Ramona. Thank you, Ramana. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name. Thank you, Ramana. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Randall, for inviting me here this evening. Much like the American Islamic College's mission and purpose, I too am focused on preparing my clients for a life of purpose and impact. Purpose and impact are often missing from our foundation as professionals and entrepreneurs. As spiritual people, we tend to have dual personalities. We have one that incorporates the principles of our spirituality or religion that we tend to implement at home or in our personal relationships. And then we have the other side that mimics the system of predatory capitalism that we practice at work or in our businesses. We do this even though many of us are God-fearing and very well-intentioned. Many of us have not been exposed to conscious entrepreneurship as a way of doing business. Consciousness is an inner game. It's the heart and soul of an entrepreneur. I like to say it's who you are when no one is looking. A conscious entrepreneur does business with their values and well-being at the forefront of everything. It means that you value yourself, you value your community, you value the environment, and you value others. Many of us spiritual people think that this is who we are. We really deep down inside say, yeah, that's who I am. But yet we practice a form of business that is predatory in nature because it's what we've been taught. We buy into a culture that supports institutional racism and discrimination, yet we're shocked and surprised when we are marginalized or treated differently. We practice and bring into our own communities and into communities where we do business a culture that supports healthcare disparities, police brutality, and other issues that we claim to be fighting against. See, predatory capitalism refers to the cultural acceptance of domination and exploitation as normal economic practice. So, as an antidote, which you have rooted in your mission at the American Islamic College, and I have in my corporate mission, is to encourage people to live a life of purpose and impact. To live a life of purpose means that we navigate through life and we are aware of the reason for which something is done or created or why something exists. And this awareness, this heightened awareness, should support our decisions and our choices and should ultimately help us to live a more impactful life. To have impact means that the action of one object comes forcibly into contact with another. When two objects collide, one or both of the objects is altered. And I coach my clients to think of their conduct as that object that comes into contact with another object, and the force of the good energy of what they represent can impact the other object to change or to become more aware, to say the least. But instead of being intentionally impactful and purposeful, many of us subject ourselves to business processes rooted in dominance and exploitation. And it is from this hidden principle that we move into and navigate the corporate world and the world of entrepreneurship. And the goal here is to raise your awareness so we change that. For many of you who are on social media, you probably have seen the numerous campaigns that are really raging through the African American community that encourage us to buy Black. There's been a recent surge in a campaign to raise awareness on how we spend money and how that money spent shapes our communities. Blacks in America have about a $1.4 trillion gross national income. Only 2% of that money, or about $26 billion, is recirculated in the Black community. And there's tons of statistics out here, but just to tell you a few, if the dollar circulates 6 hours in our community, it circulates for 17 days in the white community and 30 days in the Asian community, just to give you an example. And in order to have more intention about extending the lifespan of the dollar in our community, we have to first own more businesses and introduce much needed goods and services into our communities. Our businesses must be rooted in identifying problems in our communities and solving them. There was an article that was online. It was published by the Pittsburgh Courier, which is a really old newspaper and very historic newspaper in our community. It came out last year. And in that article, it was reported that Black-owned businesses accounted for about 28% of all businesses in Washington, D.C., for example, which was the highest ratio in the nation. Second to that was the state of Georgia, where 20% of the businesses were Black-owned, and then the state of Maryland with the same percentage, and about 19% in Illinois. When I have this conversation with my friends and colleagues internationally, they just can't understand why these statistics are so grim for us as Muslims in America, for us as African Americans, and why we don't have more businesses that positively impact our communities. For us, as followers of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we have been given an instruction that says that we must get up and do something for ourselves. And in doing so, it is important that we obtain our education, but it's also important that we improve upon the knowledge and systems that we are taught in college and in our advanced degree programs so that we become conscious entrepreneurs and avoid the system of predatory capitalism that is rooted in dominance and exploitation. Listen, if we bring this system of dominance and exploitation into our communities as African Americans, as Hispanics, as Muslims, we're doing nothing more than setting up the same type of system that we are all looking to escape from. So our mutual mission to live a life of impact is really powerful and really important. And as a conscious entrepreneur, I'm encouraging us to improve the existing capitalist model that we have all studied or are currently studying to one that incorporates our principles and values as Muslims and as members of our respective communities. Check this out. According to sociologist Emanuel Wallerstein, institutional racism has been one of the most significant pillars of the capitalistic system. Capitalism and racism have an unending collaboration. It's way more than an entanglement. When we define something as institutional, what we mean is that it is established as a convention or norm in an organization or culture. So institutional racism means that racism is established or generally accepted as a norm in a particular industry, organization, or culture. And because we're so busy just trying to comply with the system to get ahead, we don't know that we're actually supporting that institutional bias. It is often so normalized that the education and training system designed to prepare you and I to work in these institutions and organizations are peppered with hypnotic language that causes us to self-implement the racism and marginalization that we claim to be protesting against. This is why it's so important that we design new business models and unravel the underlying biases that exist in the design of the fabric of many of these institutions. We cannot just take what we have learned and been hypnotized to believe in school or in the corporate world and bring it over to our businesses and our communities and think that it will help to liberate us as a people. This is why focusing on stakeholders, missions, and principles is so important for us as conscious entrepreneurs. We must design a system of measurement and analysis or metrics that help us to evaluate how we're doing and how others are doing as it relates to the stakeholders that are important to our community. This alliance between racism and predatory capitalism is visible in environmental racism, wage gaps, food sources, housing prices, lending practices, the drug trade, healthcare, the criminal justice system, student loan debt, and even stereotypes that lead to certain types of advertising campaigns, television shows, and even music. There was an article written by Sam McKenzie Jr. entitled "Why Racism is an Issue of Predatory Capitalism." And in that article, Mr. McKenzie says this: if we want to talk about the drug trade, capitalism and racism push drug dealers to push drugs. We can blame predatory capitalism on the lack of regulation in the pharmaceutical industry. With criminal justice, predatory capitalism and the criminal justice system are an illicit pair that reproduce unequal brutalization. It's predatory capitalism that heavily arms police forces as their suppliers get richer. The prison system has a quenchless demand for our prisoners to fill their ready-made roles because of predatory capitalism. See, when I think about our schools, I see how predatory capitalism and racism lead and lace them at every level. Then for Black college graduates, saddled in a rat race with student loan debt, much heftier than other students, predatory capitalism gives them very little rewards. And as industries either saturate or abandon captive communities, predatory capitalism can engineer stereotypes with its systemic and selective exploitation and exclusion. So as conscious entrepreneurs, we have specific principles that I suggest that we operate from. First and foremost, we must focus on conscious leadership and being conscious leaders. And we must build organizations that mirror the actions and personality of the conscious leaders at the top of our organizations. Our businesses must be oriented around stakeholders. And stakeholders are those that are impacted by our businesses. See, conscious leaders know the importance of taking into account all of their stakeholders. See, we're never going to become a premium brand or premium brands or leaders in the world of business by only focusing on shareholders or our bottom line or profits. We have to redefine the bottom line. It can't just be profits by any means necessary. See, shareholders or owners should be just one of our stakeholders. Conscious entrepreneurship is not about profiting by any means necessary. It's about redefining the meaning of the bottom line. And what we want that bottom line to include are other factors that help to measure the success of the business in other ways, other than in additional ways, I should say, other than profitability. So we're not saying we don't want to profit. We want to profit, but we want to profit with a purpose. So we have to ask ourselves questions. How is your business doing based upon its relationship to the environment? How does your business impact the youth in your community? Is the transference of generational wealth important to you and your business? Are you conducting business in accordance with the principles of your religion or your spiritual beliefs? How is your business impacting the community that it serves? Are you just getting money by any means necessary and disregarding everything and everybody else around you? See, I also feel like we must encourage a conscious culture. A values-based culture is one that is intentional about how people act and perform. When a business culture is not defined, see, when we start our businesses and we don't say, this is what our culture is, this is what's important to us, it's more than just profiting by any means necessary. And when we don't enforce that culture, then our people aren't moving in the same direction. And when a corporate culture is not defined, what is likely to happen is that the employees or the members of that organization become disengaged. I don't know if you guys know this, but disengaged employees generally cost an organization somewhere around $3,400 for every $10,000 in annual salary. See, disengaged employees cost the American economy up to $350 billion every year due to lost productivity. So, operating our businesses in accordance with values that are important to us and defining our culture can even be more profitable than a traditional business because we are more likely to have employees who are engaged and who buy into the consciousness of the business. But this type of thing has to be woven into the way that we learn business on an educational level so that we then begin to start businesses that begin like this. So we don't have to go back and spend the unnecessary money trying to change a system once we've got the business up and going. And if we got the business up and going, it's not too late, but we just have to understand that it's going to take work to change the culture. Our business must have a higher purpose. The company should be in business to do more than just make money. Great leaders realize that in order to become successful over the long term, you must provide true value. That comes from passionate people getting inspired about their work. And we must accept our own and be ourselves. We have to stop trying to play someone else's game. We have to be true to ourselves. We have to be true to our customers, our employees, our community, and our cause. Make a decision about who you are and what you want to be. And what I've seen as a career professional in business, you will be rewarded. Your authenticity is your currency. There's no one else like you individually, and there's no other culture like yours. So we have to embrace it and demonstrate its excellence. This is a strategy. This is doing business with intention. This is closing the gap between our professions and our businesses and our spirituality and our religion. It's not emotion and not media seduction. This is smart people like us thinking strategically and focusing on how to use the consciousness that we are taught to benefit us and our community. We must close this gap. We cannot continue to live one way and do business another way. This division is making us weak and negatively impacting our ability to sustain our success. President Abraham Lincoln lifted a theme from the Gospel of Mark when he said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Jesus states in that same gospel, "And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand." Well, we are building a divided internal house. that is weakened because we are internally separated, almost with a split personality. And that house cannot stand, and it cannot be strong, and will not stand with the cavern of division that exists today. So before I give you my contact information, in my bio, we talked about Sajda House, and I want to bring that up. But I also want to say to you that my goal and the goal of the Mind of an Entrepreneur movement is to help marginalized people around the world gain access to tools and strategies that will help us to become stronger, healthier, happier, wealthier, and to experience more love. That's really what it's all about. Finding ways to sustain ourselves, to do business, and to live our life so that we're stronger, healthier, happier, wealthier, and we experience more love in our life. So with that, let me tell you really quickly about Sajda House. I'll give you my contact information, and I'll turn it back over to Romana, and I know she may have some questions. Sajda House is the former national home of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and it's the single most important piece of property in modern day Black history. There are more leaders that have met, dined, and visited that home than any other building in modern day Black history. From the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Malcolm X, Mrs. Betty Shabazz, Ambassador Andrew Young, Hosea Williams, Bernard Lee, Stokely Carmichael, Senator Adam Clayton Powell, Sam Cooke, Muhammad Ali, James Baldwin, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and even members of the Black delegation of the 1968 Democratic National Convention that was held in Chicago. I was blessed to reclaim and restore this sacred cultural space that's located at 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue in the historic Kenwood neighborhood. And it is going to be a sacred cultural space. That's all we're going to do there, is let people come in and experience the sacredness of this space, to learn more about the leaders who met there. And we're carefully preserving it to present the truth about this rich history. And we plan to conduct virtual and in-person historical and architectural tours. The home is filled with spiritual elements that we're so excited to tell you about. Prior to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad occupying the home was once called the William French Burroughs House and was designed by famed architects Frost and Granger. It's so unique. The history of the original couple that owned the home is significant to the spiritual components of the original architecture that we're working so carefully to preserve. So to reach out and learn more about me, I thank you for listening. You can always follow me on social media at Mo Today, that's MOETODAY, or at Sajda House, SAJDAHHOUSE. And you can listen to me weekly on my podcast on WOL News Talk Radio at noon Eastern Time every Wednesday. And there's past episodes available that are out there on Spotify, and you can click the link in the bio to learn more about that as well. So thank you, Romana, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm happy to entertain any questions and answer whatever I can.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's open up for questions. If you can use the chat box, or Masood, are we able to, we have a small group, so are we able to unmute me? You can unmute yourself and ask if you would like.
Yeah, they can unmute themselves.
Okay, okay, great. I have a question. I can start us off.
Yes.
I know you have a book. Could you say a little bit more about your book?
Yes, the book is called The Mind of an Entrepreneur. And I wrote the book because I was one of those persons that had always been a great honor student, spent most of my life in honors classes and honor students. I got out of college and went to corporate America, and I was what they call a rock star. And when I got ready to transition into the world of business, I struggled. I couldn't figure out how to put it together. I couldn't figure out how to make money. And I realized that technically, or my IQ from a business standpoint, I had that together because I could do what I was trying to do for myself, for other people, but I couldn't do it for myself. And so what I realized was that I needed mental strategies, and there were some things that I needed to overcome and navigate through in order to allow myself to be successful, in order just to allow myself to do what I was doing for everybody else. I was running around the country, making millions of dollars for other people, building businesses and helping them to develop systems and processes. And I was very frustrated, and I couldn't understand why I was having a hard time doing it for myself. And as I started to study myself and study mindset, I realized that it was mental strategies that I was missing. And I knew I couldn't have been the only one that was struggling with those mental strategies. So that's why I wrote the book. I started off, interesting story, with about 300 or 400 pages in the book. And then I met with a consultant and they said, just cut it down to a small book, because as you go through your journey, you're going to want to add more to the book. And so the second book is actually done. I just keep tweaking it and messing with it. So inshallah, I'll be able to put that out soon and really help us to learn to navigate the world of business.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. Any questions?
More of a comment. I just thank you, Sister Wendy. What an excellent representation you've given us.
Thank you,
You're
Brother
a beautiful
Randall.
example, well spoken, very articulate. You understand your breadth of operation and some. So we appreciate you joining the AIC community and sharing with our constituents. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think I see a question in the chat. It says, how are you applying the ideas you shared in your business? Do you have defined mission statement, and how did you turn that into procedures with your employees? How many employees are in your business, and how do you see them benefit from that? So yes, using those principles, and first starting off by creating a mission statement and a goal, defining who my customers are, and defining what's important to me. So of course, profit is important. And if we take the healthcare business, for example, we decided that we wanted to market through education. So it was important to us to educate people on their healthcare needs, as opposed to sort of some of this wham bam, thank you ma'am type of approach to healthcare. And so that was important to us. And so that was woven into our policies and procedures, where clinicians are required to meet with and explain to every patient what is going on with them. Patients leave with a document that tells them exactly what the results of their tests are and what their exact condition is. That same document is communicated to their primary care physician, so that there's a circle of care that's involved, because we're just one aspect of their care. So this whole stakeholder management piece was woven into our system and to our process. And it's something that I do with every business, because it's one thing to say, you know, I want to profit by any means necessary. But if we don't learn to add other stakeholders into the mix and think about how we're impacting the environment and things like that, all we're doing is bringing that same predatory system into our businesses. And we're going to end up with the same exact situation that we're trying to escape from. So it's important to me to think about all those other things. How are our youth impacted? Do we bring in interns? We try to do summer programs. We try to do things for seniors where we help them become entertained. So all the things that are important, and you can't do everything, but I like to say pick 3 or 4 that are important. You know, if you're in a business where, let's say you use certain types of containers, let's say it's a restaurant, and you know that styrofoam fills landfills and impacts the environment, then part of your stakeholder mission should be, how do you use materials that don't damage the environment or don't pollute the air? Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. What about the community that you're in? How does your business impact that community? Those are all things that we have to think about as conscious entrepreneurs, but we have to be taught that as we're learning to build businesses and learning to build systems and policies and design policies and procedures. And then it will become a little bit more natural.
Lots of powerful words of wisdom and things to think about. Thank you so much for that. We still have time for a few questions, so the floor is yours. Feel free. You can use the chat box or you can unmute yourself.
Everybody's thinking probably.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of powerful
subjects. Yeah, this is one of those subjects. I'm sorry to interrupt you. That what happens is that we go to school all our lives and we're taught and we see business. And so we just naturally and subconsciously think this is business. It's like sending your child to work at McDonald's at 15 or 16, and then they're exposed to predatory capitalism and people introducing food that's bad to the community, or maybe they're around adults who are not conducting themselves properly. Then they walk away thinking, this is business. This is how business is done. So it makes you, this kind of thing makes you start to think like, is there anything that I'm doing that's predatory or that's based on exploitation or dominance that I need to fix? Sometimes we just get low self-esteem. That's what I was dealing with. Low self-esteem because of the system of dominance and exploitation. And so I had to work, to bring myself out of that and not always be woe is me. Let's see, Sister Audrey, Assalamu alaikum, says, how can we as media help get the message out about conscious and purpose-filled businesses? That's a good question. I think it's important to highlight those businesses. I think there needs to be articles and people need to read about conscious entrepreneurs. We like to read Forbes because somebody says this is the top billionaire or but there's also tons of millionaires and people who aren't even there yet as a millionaire who are contributing to stakeholders and doing a great job at impacting their community. And the whole idea is to find a problem and solve it. Look in your community. This is a great time to do it. Find a problem and solve it and introduce that much needed goods and services into your community. So I think the media can help by highlighting conscious entrepreneurs, whatever your target market is from a media standpoint, if it's women, if it's, conscious entrepreneurs who live in a certain neighborhood, and highlight those, because the more stories we see, the more it gives us confidence that we can do it as well. Somebody says, can you recommend strategies on how to reproduce the right mindset in our children? That's important. That was you, Brother Randall. Yes. I have to say it like this. I was very fortunate as a child because my father and mother, when they were doing business, so they worked their jobs and then they had businesses on the side. And they would just let us roll with them. So we got to see what business looked like. And we got to put a model together in our mind. My father would come to my room, to the door and say, I'm going to do such and such. You rolling? And I thought, yeah. And, hurry up and put my shoes on and stuff. And so that's one way. I also think that as conscious entrepreneurs, we have to offer opportunities for our youth to come and work and shadow in our businesses. That way we start to build this pipeline. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were interviewing in college for jobs, it seemed like all the other children either knew where they were going to work or they kind of had an in or they felt we're comfortable, but here we are, we all nervous and trying to get our resume together. Well, a lot of that is because they had interned at a lot of these companies and they already knew that they were a shoo-in. They already knew the culture. They were already familiar with the work. So when it came time to hire graduates, those that interned or who were familiar got hired first. And we have to build that same type of pipeline. And I think we don't put a limit on our children. I think at a very young age, we should let them do business and let them meet other business people. If we can find ways for them to shadow, because they have to see it, because they're bombarded with this predatory way of doing business. All they have to do is just watch television and they see that. So we have to give them something else to balance that out. And then it becomes a teachable moment even as we're going through something. They may see us, struggle with something, and we can talk to them and have that conversation, because there's no age limit on it. I mean, they can be 12 or 13 years old and build these businesses. And a lot of them are smarter than we are when it comes to, trade and industry and that kind of thing. But we have to give them alternatives other than this predatory system that is all about dominance and exploitation. And where we get tricked, if I can just say this happens a lot in healthcare, because there are a lot of well-meaning and well-intentioned people that work at a lot of these institutions. Because the idea when you go into corporate, and we've all been there, is that you want to do a good job based on the system. So I grew up in the Midwest. I was a good student. I was a good little girl. So that's grooming for going into the corporate world. So the good little girls and the smart little girls and boys get the good jobs when they graduate from school. And so now I'm in a rat race, if you will, trying to figure out, how do I do better? How do I get noticed? How do I get promoted? And so I may not even be aware that I'm supporting institutional biases or marginalizing somebody. And so even though I don't mean that, I'm a good person, I might be a surgeon, a doctor, or a nurse, and when I come and meet with you, you're looking at my face and you see the sincerity and you see the love, and you say, there's no way that person would be biased towards me. And they probably would not be in their own individual heart. But based on the system that they're practicing and that they're doing business in accordance to, they are creating that bias and that marginalization. And so that's what we have to teach our children and give them opportunities. We got to build businesses like no tomorrow, because they got to be able to get in those businesses and then expand them and create systems that are different. Otherwise, they're just going to go right into the system. And I don't care how conscious they are and how loving they are. In order to survive, they are going to have some level of compliance with that system that is biased against many of us in the community. Let's see. Somebody said, let me make sure.
Yeah, what strategies should conscious entrepreneurs use to take a stance against predatory practices with companies we may interact or need to do business with?
That's where a lot of times the challenge lies. Sometimes you might be at a company that may listen to you, where you can put together a proposal or speak to somebody higher up and talk to them about biases. I think the first thing you have to learn while you're there is how to pick your battles. You don't want to be the employee that's always fighting against every single thing, because it's going to ultimately impact your ability to steal away and open up your own business. So you want to pick your battles and see if you can join as many committees. Many companies will have the recycling committee or the diversity committee. Try to join some of those committees and find a way to shed a light on things, because a lot of people just need education. Some people just don't see it, because like I said, they're just busy trying to comply with a system, and they don't know what that system is designed to do. Once you get into the company, you get bought into that environment, you're not thinking about what's happening outside of it in most cases. So try to join committees, try to get into a leadership position if you can. But ultimately, if you can't make it happen, then understand what battles you need to fight and what battles, some things you have to let go. Most important thing is to be an example. A lot of times people are driven by competition. And so if they're working with you and they see you're focused on keeping your word to somebody, or they see that you are focused on being fair when it comes to salary analysis or things like that, or you're focused on raising the awareness about a sexist comment or racist comment, then a lot of times some people will go along with you and you'll start to gain some momentum. Sometimes you might be in a company where that's just the tone at the top, and so you might need to find another job. But being convicted in who you are and being an example is very impactful.
Thank you. There are companies that are employee owned that started as a private business, then turned it into that model and have social responsibility toward the community, such as SAIC, REI, etc. Is that a similar model to what you are proposing?
It is a similar model to what I'm proposing. But what I'm also saying is we have to tweak it further so that it's a little bit more personalized. There's a lot of conscious entrepreneur movements and socially responsible movements out there. And depending on your community, you may have to make some tweaks to those models so that your community is positively impacted by the business that you're starting. The whole idea, even if you start with something that's a little bit more generic, the idea is you want to make sure that you're not bringing that predatory style of business into your community and into your business. Because all you're doing is just setting up that same system over and over again. It's going to be a system that's dependent upon dominance and exploitation.
As you started the journey of entrepreneurship, you mentioned there were things about your mindset you had to work on. Could you expand on a couple of those things?
Yeah. So my story, some of my story, is I started reading at a very early age. And so reading and learning sort of became my mojo. And so I was always challenged by school, and I love school. And so I started to excel at school. That was just my thing. But the other side of me was that I'm an extremely sensitive person. I'd cry at the drop of a dime when I was a little girl. My mother would be like, "What are you crying for now?" Sometimes I couldn't even explain it. And so I had to learn to, well, before I say that, I didn't like the fact that I was that sensitive. It bothered me and it embarrassed me. But then I had to learn, okay, well, how is this an asset? This is obviously who I am. And so what I started to realize when I would sit down at the table in the corporate world or whether I'm doing a project, I realized that my sensitivity allowed me to see details that a lot of other people couldn't see. It allowed me to notice things or hear things that other people couldn't see or hear. And I started to realize that it gave me an advantage. And that was my clue to the power of authenticity, because that was something that was authentic and unique in me. And so then I said, all right, Wendy, so let's study emotional intelligence. Let's figure out how we can use these emotional states and use these feelings that you have and these vibrations that you get so that you then become more productive and you can get what it is that you want. So I started by finding something that was unique in myself that bothered me about myself. And it really actually was my sensitivity. And now I love it. I'm not bothered by it. I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm happy that I can hear and see and feel things that might be extraordinary, but it helps me in business. It helps me when it comes to negotiation, not even just from a negative standpoint, but from a positive standpoint. For example, I may be having a conversation with somebody in a group, and I realize that that person is feeling a little bit a little uncomfortable, for example, before somebody else might recognize that. And so it helps me learn to even temper my language so that I create team members and not enemies. That's what that sensitivity, that's one of the skill sets that the sensitivity, embracing the sensitivity gave me. So finding something that is authentic to you, embracing it and developing it and turning it into a unique skill set is what I would say to anybody that, that's out there. And mine was my sensitivity and my emotional intelligence, and learning how to develop that and use it as a tool and a strategy.
Thank you. We have a message from Warda Mohammed. Thank you so dearly, Dr. Wendy Mohammed. It has been so beautiful and an honor hearing you this evening. What has been the greatest joy that you have held on to while doing this work and learning more about mindfulness?
The greatest joy. Um, Discovering myself and understanding myself. I feel that discovering and understanding myself has helped me to marry the world of spirituality and business. So I don't have to have a split personality anymore. So when I would go to work in public accounting or as a consultant, I would leave spiritual Wendy at home. And so now I don't have to do that because, and it helped me to become more powerful and more joyful, and work more cheerfully, actually, when I began to close that gap. And so once I saw that that gap was there, I started to work very, very hard to close that gap. I realized that a lot of it had to do with what I was taught about business, and then what I learned about myself, and figuring out, how do I fix that? How do I close it? Because I can't be, this highly spiritual person at work and then, or at home, and then go to work and then I'm this big predator, hardcore corporate person.
And I do find that that's often that business can be predatory, that capitalism is predatory, as you mentioned. And so I'm thinking, because, we're hoping to expand our degrees as well, and have a program in business or Islamic finance in it. So I just find that what you're saying about conscious entrepreneurship, ethical entrepreneurship, the element of spirituality, as you're mentioning, all of those things are Islamic, and so it fits really nicely, I feel, at our college. So we'll have to talk more. But did you find anything like that elsewhere, in terms of like curriculum and study and courses? Was that type of thing offered, or not touched at all?
It's sporadic. There are places people talk about it, but I think there's a gap when it comes to being able to implement it and being able to figure out, how do I weave this into my policies and procedures? And I did a show on my podcast about how to be a Muslim entrepreneur, because you have to learn how to weave those processes into how you do business and what you do for a living. And it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be bold. You have to be willing to be a pioneer sometimes, but it doesn't have to be mean-spirited or negative either. And I'm certain I can tell you that what you will find is that there is a thirst and a hunger out here in the business world for people who do business like this.
Mm-hmm.
People are tired, and people are tired of the negativity, and a predator is going to always be a predator. You remove that from the equation, right? But there's masses of people out here that want their shot. They want their opportunity. They want to learn, and they want to work with somebody who's going to be fair to them and treat them in a certain kind of way. And I think that we can make this a movement in our communities. But I think it's going to start at an educational level. We can have a certain impact with existing businesses, but I think the real impact is on an educational level with our youth, because all we're doing is just mimicking a system that's already been set up by, to create systemic bias.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm happy to talk about that. I think that that's really critical for us. And it helps us to be stronger as spiritual and religious people, right? Because part of the reason why I felt weakened was because, like I said, I had to go to work and be one person, and then be somebody else at home. And so that just weakens you. And then you got to remember how to act and what to do. And so I'm blessed now to just be able to be me. And that has been the biggest component to my success. And I would say that my success exploded when I was able to accept who I am and be myself.
MashaAllah. Very good. Well, we have time for one last question if anyone wants to ask or a comment. Brother Ahmed Sultan put a link up in the chat if anyone is interested for setting up an employee-owned business. That's a helpful resource. Thank you. What final thoughts? Oh, okay. The wisdom, amazing. The wisdom you have shared is beyond appreciated, Sister Wendy. Such a powerful lecture. May all your efforts be rewarded, inshallah. Thank you for being so genuine and relatable. The nuggets you have dropped will certainly be remembered. Agreed. Thank you, Sajda, for sharing that.
Thank you. Praise be to Allah.
Before we disconnect, can you give us, tell us how we can get your book, number one, and how we can access your podcast one more time before you go?
Yes. So the book is available right now on Amazon. You can go to Amazon, or you can go to my social media pages. On Instagram, it's Mo Today, Moetoday, and Sajda House, Sajdahhouse. On Facebook, it's The Mind of an Entrepreneur. If you click the link in the bio, there's like a link share. It's got a link to the book. There's a link to the past podcasts. And you can just listen to all the different topics that I come up with. I don't talk about anything that I don't know anything about. So I'm not a lecturer per se. I'm not going to lecture you on the plastic of a particular type of ink pen if I never made the ink pen. So most of what you'll hear me talk about are expansions of experiences that I've had, or things that I've done to do the in-depth study on myself, to improve myself. That's what you'll hear. And I've got hundreds of lectures out there that go back to 2008. And so those links are in the bio. And so everything there, you know, how to donate to Sajda House, the podcast, the book, you can get on the mailing list for the new book. So it's all there in the bio in the social media pages.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and for sharing all of your wisdom with us. This was a fantastic lecture, and this is such a nice way to end the lecture series this semester.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Brother Randall, did you have anything to say?
Oh, she said it all so eloquently. Thank you. You're a wonderful host, Ramona. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for attending. You'll be receiving a feedback form shortly in your inboxes, so please give us your feedback. And thank you so much again, Wendy, Sajda, Muhammad. The links that you mentioned, those are on our website, so you can click on those if you want to follow her on social media, right?
Thank you all.
Great.
May Allah bless everyone with their professional endeavors. I hope you experience more goodness than you've ever experienced or imagined.
Ameen. Ameen. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam.